I've seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby Podcast. I am Cammy Black. I forgot to say we're brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. That's normally my normal entry, but I skipped that bit. We're here to catch up on the latest news and also a bit from the weekend as well, the action between Bordeaux and Edinburgh. Joining me to do that, we have Sandy Smith. Hello, Sandy.
Evening all. How you doing?
Second week in a row, we're going to subject you to having to talk about Edinburgh losing. John, of course, John Anderson joining us as well, gets a free pass again this week because Glasgow have no skin in the game because they didn't qualify for anything this year. John, let's be honest.
Well, yeah, I get that you're getting that little dig in just now in the balance to get some sort of balance in there. But yeah, evening all. Looking forward to this.
We are currently live on Facebook, Scottish Rugby Podcast, YouTube, Scottish Rugby Blog, Twitch, Scottish Rugby Podcast, and if you're on Twitter, we're on Periscope there. If you find at Scott Rugby Blog, we're live on there as well. You can get involved live in the comments. We've got Ron Wilson joining us who says, good evening, guys. And I think Andy Lone's lurking about somewhere as well. Chip in during the night. We'll keep a track on them. Happily put any up on screen and have a chat about any points you've got to make. This is also available afterwards as an audio download on Acast, Apple Podcasts, anywhere else you can find podcasts as well. We also have our Patreon, where we are putting out exclusive content as well as ad-free versions of these podcasts. So if you don't want the little adverts in them and you can't watch live, that's the way to do it. For only £3 a month, you get in the Richie Vernon Thunderdome. That gets you access to all the content. But if you want to pay a little bit more and you want to pay upgrades to the Dougie Donnelly Members Lounge, you can come in for the cold, warm yourself up. We'll get you a beer. You'll have to pay for, obviously, we'll bring it to you, but you do have to pay for the beer. That's £5 a month, and you get a shout out on the podcast. So thank you very much to Bobby Vanika McLean, and I hope I've read that out correctly, that the first part of the double barrel name, Bobby. But welcome into the Dougie Donnelly Lounge. Take a seat. You're very welcome. We've got a fair bit of news to get through tonight. I suppose the first things first. I suspect this certainly was Alan McDonald's hands in the ruck. It may have been going to be yours, John. But it's
yes.
The news of the day. We'll start with the news of the day, which is obviously we're recording this on Tuesday. And there's been announcements in Scotland as well, but the main news today is that sporting events are not going to go ahead with crowds.
Yep.
The Boris Johnson, when he made his announcement today, said for at least 6 months. He said for at least 6 months for all the restrictions. So I took that to mean including sport people or crowds at sporting events. However, I understand Jason Leach has come out. He being the man. With the big say in Scotland, has come out and said we're going to review after 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. We're keeping the caveat of we're going to review things regularly up here, so it's not quite as definitive. And I think there's maybe something in just the way Boris tends to be quite verbose about things, and there's maybe just something about the way he's maybe said that for dramatic effect. Who knows?
Yeah, and whether or not I think those things, whether or not it covered everything that he was announcing, rather than just specific bits.
Yeah.
However, this announcement today came not 24 hours after Scottish Rugby had announced their own new membership tiers, which, let's be honest, they could have waited 24 hours. This announcement was coming. It wasn't like it was a big secret. We knew this was coming. I don't know why they couldn't have just waited 24 hours, especially given that they're not releasing the membership packages till tomorrow anyway. So out go the membership packages. No more season tickets, no more autumn test packages, no more membership. There are now 3 tiers that you can join as a member of Scottish Rugby in the Supporters Club. There is Nevis, obviously the highest tier, being the highest, also the highest amount. You see what they did there? That's clever.
To be a fly in the wall of that marketing.
Do you think how much thought was given to that?
Suggested and taken right away, I would imagine.
What's the tallest thing, lads, in Scotland? Ben Nevis, that'll do.
Richie Gray.
Aye.
Oh, it could have got the Richie Gray. Wait, who wouldn't buy membership of the Richie Gray tier? What's the middle tier then?
Richie Gray, Johnny Gray, Richie Vernon.
Oh, the 3. See, well, I think you'd have to stick with the
Richie Gray, Richie Vernon, Jamie Ritchie.
True, I think Jamie Ritchie would have to be the middle tier. Unless, Richie Vernon would be the top tier, of course.
Oh, well, exactly. I mean, exactly.
Richie Vernon, Richie Gray, and then Jamie Ritchie purely on age.
Yeah. Age
and awesomeness. So for the Nevis range, which we're calling the Richie Vernon tier, because we think it's a better name, you get access to a ballot for all international rugby at BT Murrayfield. So that is in case at short notice they can have games. You get a pre-sale window for women's internationals. You get your name on the players' tunnel for 2 seasons, and 50% off stadium tour, and also the Front Row Digital magazine, which we'll come on to in a moment. That is £34. So I think it's a one-off payment. I think it's £34 a month. Yeah. One-off payment of £34. Yeah. So already with the announcement today, that's on a sugary peg, Sandy.
Yes, I mean it's not, doesn't feel any different, to be honest, than the joining the Castle Club on the basis that you might get some money off a season ticket. When, quite frankly, it doesn't look to me as if there's going to be any live sport to be watched in the whole of the next season. So, and I suspect Scotland will be no different. I would just say that surely it's still above all the lounges that the SRU have announced as Dougie Donnelly's. The Dougie Donnelly lounge has surely got to still be at the top now.
You can't get higher than that. I mean, what are you looking at? 5 months in the Dougie Donnelly lounge?
Yeah.
Think of all that quality content you're going to get for that.
Yeah. And glasses of red wine that Dougie seems to like.
I know, exactly. So that's the Nevis. So again, it's not... I suppose, given the announcement today, you're taking a massive gamble that you're actually going to be able to access any of that. It does, I will say, it does cover through to the Six Nations, so there is probably a tiny, tiny prospect that by that point games may happen, albeit flu season still going on at that point. So I don't really, unless there's some vaccine or medication or something at that point, it seems unlikely. But you can the McDewey tier. Now I can work out for the is that a character from Highlander? Do we know what McDewey is?
Is that not another? Is it not just another hill or mountain?
Is it the second biggest hill? If they've literally gone, what is the second biggest hill in Scotland?
It is the second highest mountain in Britain. Actually,
the second highest mountain in Scotland after Ben Nevis.
And it's in the Cairngorms National Park.
Now I know sometimes we give them a hard time up at the big house in Murrayfield sometimes, but really, lads, come on. Your top tier, 2 tiers of membership with the highest mountain in Scotland and the second highest mountain in Scotland.
I would hazard, I guess, the third might be.
I doubt it.
The third's Lomond. No, I think Ben Lomond might be the third highest. Or is it just, have they just gone, what's the biggest lock? I need to check now whether Ben Lomond.
Well, I'm just looking at it, and the highest, Ben Nevis, McDewey, and then the next, which I've never heard of, I'm afraid to say, is Brearach. Brearach, yeah.
I would have gone with Lomond because no bugger could pronounce it.
Yeah, and you're like four further down before you get anywhere near any you can say. So, yeah.
But to be fair, maybe they should have left it at that, because that way, if you were phoning up to Bayonne, you would maybe have gone for the one up on the basis you could at least pronounce it.
See, this is why you should be in the marketing suite there, Sandy.
Well, let's make that one incomprehensible.
I'll upsell you.
Forget your castle lounge. Let's come up with some absolutely bonkers name for it.
So the McDewey second tier, there's no pre-sale, no ballot, but you get your name on the tunnel, 50% to a discount, and digital magazine. So, it's not. I think it's £19. So I mean, this is all money into the pockets of the SRU. In fairness, we'll have to say it's money that's needed. And I'm going to come on to that in a minute, but.
19 quid though to get a name. I know it says your name, but 19 quid to get a name on the tunnel could be good fun
for two seasons. I know.
There's a lot of scope for that to be kind of abused. Let's say, just it's
just throwing that out there.
Alan McDonald was suggesting. Alan McDonald was suggesting something along the line of it's okay if you want to have 3 beers, Finn, or something like that.
Yeah. So, and then the last two tier, which I think effectively anyone with an email address can be a member of, is Lomond, which you just sign up to the newsletter for free. So
cunning,
yeah, very cunning. So the digital magazine, I don't know what you get for that. It doesn't say whether you get one digital magazine or a series of digital magazines. It's not very clear. I don't know why. I guess it's like producing a match day program. I don't know. I suppose, Sandy, would you? I would think it would be more attractive to me as a supporter to say that I would be happy to receive a digital copy of a match day program for every match, rather than a one-off digital magazine.
Yeah, but I mean, a one-off digital magazine is basically just an article on the SRU website, surely. I mean, or a series of. Whereas if it was something that was coming out, specifically aimed at a specific game and had most of the usual content you would get in the hard copy that you bought for, what was it, $5 or something, then that's got to be a wee bit more, targeted specifically at that game. That it makes a big difference. I think that would be more appropriate.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like you said, Sandy, it's it's essentially the magazine equivalent of the SRU corporate podcast, which it has its moments. Let's it does put out some good content, but at the same time, it's there to get messages out,
and it's relentlessly on message.
Yes, so that's like in the same way as Johnny Gray's tackle success. It's the podcast equivalent of Johnny Gray's tackle. 98% on message. That's also the name of Johnny Gray's sex tape.
Oh, relentlessly efficient.
Relentlessly. But I mean, it's going to be a stretch to fill it with stuff. Articles on what Blair Kingholm's favorite type of sausage.
Well, it's going to have to be stuff like that, player profiles and all that. I mean, it is this. I mean, I know that Edinburgh have done them for the towards the tail end of the season. They had one for the Glasgow home game, and it looked very much just like a match program, and it still had adverts and everything as you turned the pages. So it was it was a match program and all, but. I suppose you could have probably printed it off if you were really desperate, but it was there in that format to look at. So
Yeah, I think you'd make more money, and from a marketing point of view as well. They'd sell more ads if they produced a match day program for every game.
Yep.
Maybe that's what we should do. Maybe we should produce a wee fanzine, do
Brilliant.
our own match day programs for the Patreon.
There's
Might
like,
do
to
that.
be honest, aye. And to be honest, there's probably no reason why. I mean, given that if you know in advance nobody's getting to the game, you can work on a program and actually potentially even post it out to people at cost and see whether there would be takers for that. That would be enough. I mean, I know it's kind of old school, but people like the program, so it's the one way to get it without actually having to not be socially distant.
Very true. The other news that has been around, which is kind of ties into this, is obviously a way for the SIU to raise funds. So they are. Let's give them credit. They are ahead of the curve in as much as that they are thinking ahead about the fact there's not going to be any crowds at BT Murrayfield going in these autumn the Six Nations / autumn test hybrid, but the announcement today was that there is going to be some financial support for elite sport, and the RFU have come out and said essentially they're going to. I don't think they're going to saying they're going broke, but this is going to be a hard hit for them, John.
Yes. Yet again, the RFU came out with a begging bowl and say that we're going to go down the pan unless people bail us out. It's a basic example of like financial mismanagement, and forgive me for not necessarily being terribly sympathetic to it, given that when Scotland were in the early days of professionalism and were sitting under a mountain of debt, there certainly wasn't any sympathy coming from well, we say English. What would it be? Would it have been English newsletters at that point? So that's you have to cut your cloth, and unfortunately the RFU have got they've got financial difficulties and hard bleeds.
Yeah. Yes, I mean I think I was frantically before we came on air, Sandy, going back through the Offside Lines articles and the interviews they did with Mark Dodson. I say interviews, I think the more kind of press conferences about the state of affairs in Scottish rugby, and certainly the news coming out of Murrayfield is that Scottish rugby is maybe a little bit better placed to absorb the hit. It's not going to leave us in a good place, but at one point they were talking about trying to come out of it with no redundancies, which would seem ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, well, I suppose they're like businesses like any other business, I suppose. And I remember reading this week that the IRFU are in a similar state, and that they had a war chest and it's now gone. I mean, I can't remember the numbers, but they've literally spent every penny and their savings.
Yep.
And professional rugby, I suppose, at that level is a business. The only difference is you're not going to give 35 quid to John Lewis to keep them going, whereas there's quite a lot of rugby supporters are prepared to put their hand in their pocket and support the SRU, prepared to support Edinburgh Rugby, which may well be the same thing. But so I think that's a big difference there, is that they clearly need it because they're still paying wages, even though they're limited wages. I don't know that the players are all back on their full whack, but limited income, still got wages, so that's the only way that they're going to have to get some cash.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're talking about. I think that when Mark Dodson was last interviewed or last spoke, he was talking about an 18 million loss, and that was at the harsh end of things. But he was saying that, and it's from his comments, it sounded like they were planning that the autumn tests would go ahead without a crowd. And since then, we've had the announcement of the Amazon broadcast deal. Plus, then we've still got CVC hanging around in the background. There's been nothing finalised there, but presumably coronavirus is playing a part in that. I mean, it's to a certain extent, John. For always, we've been critical of Mark Dodson. If Scottish rugby does come out of this with only an 80 million. I say only because I was like, it's only 80 million. What's that? Only an 18 million loss and minimal redundancies. Then I think there'll be quite rightly we should be singing his praises.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we mentioned this a few shows ago where we said, and I believe it was you, Cammy, who uttered the phrase financial emergency and suggested that Dodson is the hero we need in a financial emergency. And we were very specific about that. All the other stuff that goes on with Dodson, all the other kind of, let's say people management stuff, ability to manage the press, ability to manage the kind of optic of things, not necessarily a strong suit, but getting a business to run to profit or run to minimal loss, he's very good at that, and he's very, he's obviously been credited with Scottish rugby coming back to some sort of fiscal stability, and he was rightly awarded the contracted bonuses that were no doubt linked to that, to much of the ire of many supporters. But I think we're lucky to have him in this situation. We talked previously about, when the vacancy for the RFU was available, and we were saying that if you were looking for someone to steady that ship, and they need financially steadied, he would have been such a good choice for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the kind of stuff they're talking or they have done is to cut the number of international youth teams. So they're keeping the under-20s, but anything below that's gone temporarily. And, that kind of stuff makes sense, I suppose, because this is hopefully it's a short-term thing. So to lose something like the under-16s, under-18s for a couple of seasons, it's no great loss, really, Sandy, is it?
No, as long as these players are still managing to play rugby, they're not necessarily going to be lost to the game. I mean, that could be their only concern, is that if they don't have that pathway for them, that by the time that reappears, that they're gone from there, and and perhaps not picked up in the same way that they would have been. I mean, we're always, to be fair, we've always got this problem because we've only got limited pro spaces. So even with Super 6, it's not like an awful lot of gaps for players to fit into. So it's probably not a great deal worse than it would have been.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a question in from Ben McCull. I think I'm assuming that's McCull, and there's something else after that. Did I say Ben? I've just made up. I've made up his first name.
Yeah, just make up a real name. It's fine.
All right, it's
Barry McLeod.
Bono McLeod gets in touch. He says, has there been any recent news about the medium-term plans for support for the Super 6 clubs? Well, the only announcement is that there is going to be a Super 6 sprint.
Woo!
Yes.
Which I assume they came up with that idea in the same marketing conference as Nevis and McDo.
Is it a sprint up Nevis?
Well, possibly, John. It's the sprint series. Really leaning heavily into the Super 6 sprint series, really leaning heavily into that alliteration, aren't they? They've managed to get sponsored again by Fosrock, which is really good news given, that's a good commitment from Fosrock given the current situation. So the idea is that we end the season with a sprint, as it says. The name's in the title. So it's going to be, everyone is going to play everybody once, I believe, between the 31st of October and the 28th of November. And then the final weekend of fixtures will be on Saturday, the 5th of December. You get first v second, third v fourth, and fifth v sixth, just to kind of determine the final table. Now, I think it was you, Sandy, who pointed out, now, it's interesting that the Super 6 was going to be broadcast on BBC and on Scottish Rugby TV. So that was the idea, that it would be watchable. Now, the announcement is, nobody is going. Could be no live games at all on the BBC or on Scottish Rugby TV. Obviously, no fans are going at this point in time. So, your point, I think, Sandy, was if nobody can go and see the games, did they really happen?
There's a tree fall in the woods. I understand the players have got to play. Otherwise, it makes a mockery. But surely, given the fact that nobody can be there physically, they could have at least put it on YouTube and allowed us to see the live games. We're pretty much, there's not a great deal of rugby. There may well be some more rugby by then, but I know I was already watching these games on YouTube because they didn't suit me to go physically, or I would have done. But I was watching them on the live game on a Sunday that they were putting on. It can't cost all that much. I mean, there was only, I think, 2 cameras in the ground, for goodness sake. So to have at least done that to make this a worthwhile exercise for the spectators, for any spectators for that matter, crazy. But
at least you had the option of attending games.
Yes,
because there is some rugby in. You could choose any club you wanted to go and watch Sandy with poor John.
Air or out.
Air or nothing.
Yeah.
It's over an hour away.
But it's in the West, come on.
Yeah, I mean, so is Ireland.
The interesting thing, I think, here as well is that there are going to be cameras at these games, because we're going to get a Scottish Rugby TV produced highlights package presented by Chris Patterson. So it's not like the reason is, well, we can't get TV crew and commentators in because of social distancing. There's going to be cameras at these games because there's going to be a highlights package, unless it's Chris Patterson just talking at us for a half-an-hour magazine program describing what he saw, when he was there.
And the number 9 is running with the ball, and there's a tackle, and
you would think if they're going to record the whole thing, then they could at least put it out live. I mean, otherwise,
at least one game, Sandy. I mean, we're devoid of rugby. You think one game would be enough to? And you would think in the current circumstances, it would get an audience as well.
Maybe they're concerned about the lack of crowds and the potential for picking up untoward noises on the pitch. Maybe it's all about the sweary words.
Maybe it is.
Kind of getting that anyway, aren't we?
Well, that's happening. I've got to say. The other slightly worrying thing about Super 6 is Stirling County confirmed the departure of 11 players from their squad this week. Cameron Henderson signed a professional contract with Leicester Tigers. Sean Kennedy's joined Glasgow Warriors on a short-term deal. Josh Henderson, fly half, had made a move to Hong Kong to pursue an international career.
Yep.
Ross Bundy has gone to France to move RC Narbonne's youth setup. Robbie Kent has got a busy work schedule, understandable at this time. Fergus Bradbury's pursuing his education. Bruce Scobie has moved to Aberdeen. Just that's it. Of course, Stirling and Aberdeen famously difficult to travel between. Aaron Thompson has made the move down south to study in Leeds. Charlie Brown has moved back to England. Mark New, who travelled from Stonehaven last season, is now focused on his career outside of rugby. And winger Andrew McLean takes a break from rugby with an ongoing injury. And I think that's there's a lot of, within that, you've got the whole range of the kind of impacts that the coronavirus is having on something like the Super 6. Life goes on outside of rugby, and players are having to make that very difficult choice. Do I carry on with the rugby career at regional level in Scotland, or do I need to go and work because work is busy and it takes priority over training? I can't afford to get injured. Because there was an interview, there's an article actually in the Telegraph, I think, was spoken to Tynedale Rugby down in Hexham, and they were saying similar things, that a lot of their players had come under pressure from their employers now, who were saying that we cannot afford for you to be injured in a rugby match because we're already stretched at the minute as it is. So it is, it's a real kind of challenge, I suppose, to Super 6, not financially, but just from a player retention point of view, Sandy.
Yeah, you can see, as you say, there's a full range there, and then there may well just be some of those guys who, whatever the reasons are given, have thought, well, they've had no rugby for 9 months, 8-9 months, and they've just realised that we can live without it. We don't need it. I know when I stopped playing, that was more or less it was like I'll give myself summer to think about it, and if I feel I'm missing it, I'll go back. Maybe they're just not missing it. It's not like there's a huge amount of money in it for them, and that'll fall all the way down through the club game as well. The completely amateur club game, because if you've gone 9 months without it and you think, you know what, I actually haven't really been all that upset that I haven't been able to play. Found another interest, whatever, it's like that. So whilst these guys are part-time pros, some of them may well have felt that way as well. I mean, some of them you can clearly see have moved on to potentially bigger and better things, and that's fine.
Yeah. John's pointing out we've had a lot of comments in on Twitch. KDilguino143 says, "Are we in search of followers, primes, or views? Come on to bigfollows.com. I would not advise going to bigfollows.com, not unless you want to see some big fellows with big follows." So we need to figure out how to sort that out. Joe Shepherd has asked the question. Now I'm going to say, Joe, thank you very much for getting in touch with us. People will know Joe, who are on the Scottish Rugby Forum, has his own podcast. He says, "Lads, where do you feel Scottish Rugby's strengths are going forward at both regional and test level?" I'm going to park that, Joe, to our hands in the ruck section, if that's okay, while we go through the news. But I wanted to flag it up that he'd asked it because we'd been spammed and I didn't have a chance to reply to him in the comments. Have a look. We've got Ryan Cobain says, "Evening, lads. Do you think rugby will have fans in for the end of the season, or will it be the 21-22 season? And should the contracts have been honoured until then?" I think it's an interesting question. I wonder. I personally don't think we'll see a return to full crowds by the end of this season. I think you might have, coming into April, May, depending on how many fixtures get postponed, potentially you might get something like we had at BT Murrayfield with the 700 fans and socially distanced.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult, particularly for the club game. Just thinking about, obviously Edinburgh are in a better position in that they've got the big house, but it's the potential for social distancing at. Are we calling it the wee house? Are we calling it? What are we calling it? The train station?
No names yet.
No names yet. So that's open for debate. Fantastic. I'll get on that. I'll name it for you. And obviously Scott. It'll cost you. What, you mean it's not going to be the John Anderson Stadium? God, I thought I had an agreement. But the point I'm trying to make is that these smaller grounds, the potential for social distancing is obviously much reduced, and the chances of getting supporters back at Scotstoun or the mini house are slim. So you would expect, if we're going to have fans, it will have to be at Murrayfield. You'll then get the classic Glasgow fans going off their head about that, and all the stuff that usually happens around shift of games to Murrayfield. So yeah,
I know someone got in touch with me, and I forget who it was. It's after last week's podcast, or maybe the week before's podcast, where we were talking about the changing rooms at Murrayfield. Now, I didn't realise there are 3 changing rooms at Murrayfield. Did you know this, Sandy?
I did not. No.
There are so Edinburgh do not get changed in the Scotland changing room for games, so they have their own home changing room at Murrayfield. Which is why when we were talking the other week about how Glasgow Warriors had used the Scottish changing room for 2 weeks running, and we were speculating whether or not that was Richard Cockrell doing some cunning kind of let's get uncomfortable for going away and playing in Bordeaux. No, it's just that Edinburgh have got their own changing room.
Right.
So Glasgow, rather than using the normal away changing room, and said, "We're not having that. Who do you think we are? We're having that one," and walk straight into the international one.
Is it some sort of privilege thing, like down at Wimbledon when you're a British player and you represent Britain in the Davis Cup, you're able to use like the special changing rooms? So players who've represented Scotland insist on being able to use the Scotland changing room.
It must. That's all I can think, is we're not going in there. Yeah. So that's where we are. That's where things are. I don't think we're going to get crowds back anytime soon. The other bit of news is the Scotland women's team. I'm going to come to Bordeaux in a minute. Don't worry, Sandy. I don't know whether I'm prolonging your pain here,
Take your time,
or whether you're happy with the avoidance. We've had the Women's Six Nations training squad was announced. They met up this weekend. 6 uncapped players. There was 2 players unable to join because they're based in the north of England, and the north of England has got additional lockdown. measures in place, even though it only applies to the south of Northumberland, which people in Berwick are most unhappy about. Let me tell you, there's no coronavirus in Berwick upon Tweed. That's the obligatory Berwick mention for this week. So we've got, there's also been, so we've got, the preparations are underway. They've got I think they've got games against, I did write this down so I could remember. So they have got games against France at home on the 24th of October, Wales away on the 31st of October, and then Italy away on the 5th of December to get the Six Nations completed. Does it? I mean, that they're all going to be behind closed doors, John.
Yep, they are. Yep. Shockingly enough, who would have guessed? Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult as well, and there's obviously, we've made the argument about Super Six and Sandy's point. If nobody sees it, did it happen? And there is the argument that these players do have to play, but there's an argument as well for the risk factor of things, and I get that people are, sports people and want to play their sport, but there's got to be a balancing act kind of weighed up in terms of, is it worth putting the game on? And I would say that for under 20s games. I would say that for games that are not televised and are not being kind of screened to the wider public. Should there be a debate about whether they should be going ahead at all? Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about this, Sandy, is I think there's a real opportunity here if Scottish Rugby handle this right to really promote the women's game, because we've had a real lack of rugby.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I think, unfortunately, because of the timing of the Women's Six Nations, it kind of like loses out to the men's version of the tournament, which gets all the hype and it's run alongside it, rightly or wrongly. I think there could be a debate about that, about whether or not it could be given its own space, or whether actually being within the men's tournament kind of helps promote it a little bit. But here's a real opportunity to say, look, you haven't had rugby for a while, but let's get this on BBC Alba, let's get this on BBC Two Scotland or whatever, and really kind of show what the women's game can be, because I think it would surprise a lot of people to kind of see the quality on show. Yeah,
and I picked up on a tweet earlier today. I didn't, because as usual, scrolling through, and I mentioned that the games have got staggered kickoffs as well. I think, which I'm assuming that because the complaint was from whoever it was that had tweeted that they won't be able to watch all of them because they're not going to be on all live at separate times. I mean, obviously we've got the magic of television to record it if that's the case, but still, given the opportunity, they think they could have maybe spaced them out so that you could watch every one and maximise that opportunity that you've just mentioned. So, yeah, I mean, they do need just to be able to. I think everybody needs to play. I mean, obviously for Scotland, it's like all the other countries. There's the Women's World Cup next year in order that they're still looking to qualify for. So that'll be their big thing for the remainder of the Six Nations to get up to speed for. I can't remember whether those games count or whether they were separate games or how it worked.
No, I think there's games against, I want to say Spain, and I apologize to people not knowing this. I've got something at the back of my head is nagging me about that they've got games, I think, in January coming up that potentially, but they're in the. I know they're certainly in the running for the qualification for the World Cup. That'd be a big step for them, and it's one I think they it's kind of they need to take.
Yeah, so I mean that would be that. I suppose that would be the reason they would want to try and get these. I mean, albeit it's like the Scotland men playing Wales. It's so long ago now. It almost doesn't seem relevant. But a tournament that's lasted a whole year. But if it helps them get ready for those qualifiers for the World Cup, then it'll be worthwhile.
Yeah. And John, it is that opportunity, isn't it, to kind of show women's rugby and show what a good. I mean, you've been along to a couple of internationals. I think I know. It's a really good day out. It's a shame we can't do that, but certainly to kind of put it front and center. Yeah,
I mean, there's no doubt that the quality of the product is. I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree to say the quality of the product that's been produced now in the women's game is vastly higher than it was even a couple of years ago. and it is blood and thunder like rugby. It is fantastic to watch, and it isn't necessarily blighted with some of the things that the men's game struggles with. You're particularly how do we restart the game, scrums, things like that. They're not quite as not as much of an issue. So you tend to get a more kind of free flowing game, and it's if that's the type of rugby you want to see, which I think most of them do. It's great day out and well worth it. And usually the tickets are dirt cheap, so if you ever do get a chance to go along and 2046 when we next get into stadiums, do take the opportunity.
So I've got an update. So we haven't got. I don't think we've got any fixtures. So the postponed fixtures for the Women's Europe Championships 2020 and the Rugby 2021 European Qualifiers. I wanted to get this right, and I will stress that I struggle at the best of time to remember where the men's fixtures are and who Scotland are playing. So that's not me being up to speed on the women's game. That's purely down to my brain being scrambled at the best of times. So there is going to be a European Championship 2020. The winner of that will take part. I'm going to get this. So it's going to be the week a round robin on the 5th, 12th, and 19th of December. The winner of the tournament will qualify for the Rugby World Cup 2021. The runner-up will progress to the final qualification tournament, which will be organised by World Rugby in 2021. So it's going to be a big ask, but it's it's there if they have started to take big scalps. They've taken out they've beaten Ireland in recent years, so it's a good opportunity. I think my only worry would be that a lot of the team are based in England because they play in the Premier 15s tournament, and that logistically might cause issues. I mean, we've already got 2 players who can't travel up from the northeast of England, so we shall watch that with interest. But yeah, I think any support. I think now is the time to support women's rugby in Scotland. It has always been the time, but now is a good time to do it. We've not had rugby on telly for a while, so let's all get behind it. Other bit of news is Tavis Scott, who was the head of external affairs, which sounded like some sort of spy agency within Scottish rugby. He's gone off to be chief executive of all salmon in Scotland. So I don't know what he does. I don't know if he sorts out the payroll or gets them together for team meetings, team away days. Come on, boys.
I think there was some sort of thing about him. It was to do with communications and sort of external communications. I think he's a sort of external comms specialist, which was quite funny given the absolute plat that Scotland made of the external comms over the World Cup period.
Yeah, when he was in charge. He's been in the role 14 months, and now he's off to go and have away days with Salmon about how are we going to spawn this year, lads?
I'd entirely forgotten that he was working for the SRU. Genuinely. When I saw that he was away doing salmon things, I thought he was gone a long time ago. So he's now climbing the fish ladder rather than the career ladder.
That's a good one. Oh, well done, Sandy. Round of applause for that.
That's a good
That's a great pun.
Have either of you two seen? So to go back to our recommendations on Amazon Prime chat from last week, have either of you two watched The Boys on Amazon Prime?
Not yet. No, it's on my watch list.
It's very good. So basically, Tavis Scott is the Deep. He is the superhero who can communicate with aquatic animals. So
well, that's like Namor in Marvel and. Is he in DC? There's fish superheroes in both DC and Marvel. So he's often
Aquaman, isn't it?
Aquaman, that's it. Yeah, Aquaman. It's Aquaman in DC, and then we've got Namor the Submariner in Marvel. I mean, I don't think for a minute that we're suggesting that Tavish has got can communicate with fish or has any kinds of superpowers.
Who knows? Who knows?
Get in touch, let us know. If you're watching Tavish, get in touch in the comments.
Or if you're in fact a salmon who's been touched by Tavish, get in touch also.
Yeah, it's a safe space. The other bit I'm going to come into it now, Sandy. Like Bordeaux versus Edinburgh. Let's get into it. We're 46 minutes into this podcast.
He's done
Mostly been a bit
well.
rugby, it's fine.
He's
it's
done
fine.
well.
That's fine. So Edinburgh lost to Bordeaux in the quarterfinals of the European Challenge Cup, 23-14, 14-0 down and came back. I mean, I think it certainly didn't start well,
No.
but to be in it with 10 minutes to go, is that progress or is that standing still, Sandy, for Edinburgh?
No, I think it's progress. I mean, the individual game, the same as last week against Ulster. First of all, you've got to have got to these places to play these games. So, that in itself is progress. Yes, Edinburgh have made the final of the Challenge Cup before, but in the same season they got the final of the Challenge Cup, I think they were last in the Pro 12 or thereabouts. So, to get to the semi-final of one, albeit under strange circumstances, and to reach the quarters and the other, that has to be progress as far as I'm concerned now. That Richard Cockrell said himself they're not ready to win at that level, and that may well be right. I mean, an awful lot of mistakes made over the 2 weeks that normally you would not have associated with this side. Handling errors. I mean, Hamish Watson dropping the ball twice. It's just you actually shouting out before you realise that you've not actually ever done that before for Hamish, to be honest. It's a kind of strange concept. People making decisions on overlaps that they probably wouldn't have made at other times. So there's definitely an element of, and I also think, to be honest, that when you look around, with the exception of Leinster, everybody's failed in the Pro 14 at this level this year. Nobody's gone on very far or much further, and it may be that we're not just quite conditioned as well as we would have been had the season gone the way it should have done normally. I mean, I thought some of the players looked as if they were struggling for fitness. On
I suppose
Saturday.
you lost Van der Merwe, Bennett, Groom, Purgos, and these are all players that when Edinburgh went well against Glasgow were all there. Yeah.
I mean, it's not as simple as saying, I mean, if Duhan was playing, we would have won, but I think we might have got at least another try out of it, and the game was close enough as it was. So, Mark Bennett playing, perhaps he wouldn't have. I mean, it's ifs, buts, and maybes, but there's no doubt that that the replacements were not of the same caliber as those that would have started the game if they'd all been available for selection. So it is an excuse, but it's a valid excuse, because you're not going up against a team that would have won the top 14 with a second strength side, really, and expect the fact that they were still in it with 10 minutes to go, and if it not for perhaps a lack of composure when it really got quite difficult at the end, they could have won it. It was there to be won, and nobody would have said that after 15 minutes. It's just after 15 minutes, I was watching through between my fingers, because I thought it was a car crash.
You had your season review written and posted almost at half time, Sandy.
No, that was a secret. No, there was. I mean, it was. To be fair, it was, and obviously I was prepared to rewrite the kind of last couple of paragraphs if we had won, but as it was, all I had to do was put the dot on the end of the sentence, because everything ended up, because I had no real confidence from Friday onwards that we were going to win. I couldn't see it, to be honest.
And Sandy's season review is now available on the blog. We did wait at least, I think, 24 hours before we posted it. It wasn't quite on the final whistle, although it was there in draft form. It was there in draft form at the final whistle. But Joe, I mean, it's an interesting point Sandy makes about preparation for this, because I think it's hard to read into this with Europe particularly. I know with the Ulster game we were saying, I think it's probably more comparable. Edinburgh were much more of an even footing, I think, in terms of players available and preparation. But with the Bordeaux game, you're asking guys to step up who really aren't match conditioned, because it's off the back of 3 games and maybe they haven't had a full proper run out. So I think you can allow the current situation to kind of seep into it as a bit of an explanation, if not an excuse, as to why Edinburgh maybe struggled. And maybe it's the fact they were in touching distance in 10 minutes should be seen as a positive.
Yes, yeah, you could spin it like that if you wanted to.
Come on, John. I was teeing it up for you to be nice to Edinburgh. Come on.
I know you were not. So, I think it's important to remember, right? So I agree with Sandy completely. I think Edinburgh have made real progress, and it is. They stuck in when they could have let things go after that first 15 minutes. So they stuck in, they dug in, and they could have got the result. And that's a really good sign for them moving forward. However, you have to ask questions. The selection, whilst guided by some of the injuries to key players that took place, the selections that were made, there was players, you've mentioned Grant Gilchrist. Grant Gilchrist was knackered 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And did not, he's not fit. He's not fit. Ben Tullis was not fit for the Ulster game. There's selections that are taking place of players that are not fit. And whether that's because they're the only people available. Now, given that Edinburgh have got about 17,000 back rows, I would imagine there was someone they could find who was maybe match fit or maybe fitter. The other point it's worth considering is we've said, obviously Edinburgh, with regards to the COVID situation, just back, few games, couple of kind of meaningless knockouts against Glasgow, and then, a defeat in a semi-final. Bordeaux have played one game, so let's get away from the whole, match fitness excuse there. Edinburgh have had more rugby than Bordeaux. Bordeaux are a better side, yes, but they've had less rugby, so maybe that accounts for the fact it was close in the end. But I just think, at that level, it's the individual errors that you're seeing from players who, you can argue fitness maybe not there. Do they make it through the season in a normal world? Maybe not. But for me, Blair Kinghorn's error, the not passing that ball, was absolutely criminal. And I've been harsh on him in the past, and I think he's a very talented player who has real potential, but he has a real lack up there of making the right decision over and over again, and he consistently fails to make the right decision. And in this case, it's cost Edinburgh probably the win, and it's not the first time that's happened. So we're not going to say that's due to match fitness or match sharpness. That is him making crucial errors at crucial times, and it's happening too often.
Not just in Edinburgh, though. I think you could kind of level that at the whole of Scottish rugby. That
absolutely.
Come back, I know, and we come back to this time and time again, that there is something fundamentally wrong or rotten within Scottish rugby. That this is something, and Richard Cockerell's been upfront about that. It's something that needs fixing, and fixing fast. And I think one thing, Sandy, is you putting themselves in situations to play these games is one part of that. Yes, but there are only so many times you can play a quarterfinal and a semi-final and lose, and not progress. For to say it's not just exposure to the big matches, it's something else. And I level that at Glasgow as well, John, because Glasgow have been in situations where they have been in contention, and yes, they won the Pro 14 final once, but they haven't won it since. Been in a final since, but they haven't won it since.
Yeah.
So it's more than, I think it's more than just being in playing in the big games. It's something else as well, Sandy.
Yeah, and I think you do have a point, because I think, as I said in my article, that when they took the field against Ulster, they had already had 3 knockout games with most of the players that were in this team. When they took the field against Bordeaux, they had 4. So, and okay, that's now 5-0, and how much big game experience do you need before you can start turning that around? It's not. I don't want to be too harsh, because they've come close in almost every single occasion, and there's obviously just one last key piece missing to get them over the finish line there. But just to pick up on what John said, because I actually had written that Damien Hoyland, I thought, had a really good game, but he hadn't played at all since
Yeah.
return from lockdown.
That's right.
And I suspect he was only chosen because they needed him to be available to go to fullback if Jacko had gone off and Kinghorn had to go to stand off. Because the whole of last season, it was Aroni Sow that was being chosen when Duhan wasn't available. So that right away there, and we didn't have I'm not going to get any conspiracy theories, but obviously we didn't have a recognised standoff on the bench. I mean, I understand that Chamberlain travelled as the 24th man, but why was he not in this? Why was he not in the squad? And the men maybe didn't have to make those same sacrifices in terms of your selection. I mean, you're right. Grant Gilchrist doesn't look fit. Both of these games, in fact, it took me a while to notice him on Saturday because he wasn't wearing his scrum cap, and when I did see him, he looked like his head was about to explode. He looked that hot. I mean, I know it was warm. I think it was 30 degrees in Bordeaux on Saturday. Yeah. I don't think Bill Mata looked. I mean, Edinburgh were better once Haining came in at number 8. So there was some weird selections. I thought. I'm sure Richard Cockrell would explain them if he felt he needed to. but yeah, they didn't.
I mean, I suppose that's part of it, isn't it? I mean, it's 30-degree heat playing in a foreign country. I mean, it's the first time Edinburgh played away from home, and it's not like, well, we're going to play away home at Leinster or Munster. We're going and playing away in the south of France in 30-degree heat.
Surely there's an argument then that if you're taking, you're going to have to back your young fly half. You're going to have to back Chamberlain this year, and he can leather the ball. He can put you in good positions. He's got a great kicking game. Surely you back him. You have to back him.
Bobby got in touch. He said I nailed the pronunciation of his surname, by the way.
Well
so
done,
I'm just picking that a wee bit, blowing some smoke up my own bum there. He says, given how Munster seem to have plateaued as nearly men, do we worry Edinburgh have a similar upper limit, or can they kick on? I think, Sandy, they can kick on from this. I think we said a couple of weeks ago, topping your conference in the Pro 14 is no, it's no mean feat. That was a good performance. Yeah. These are strange times. What we can never know what would have happened if they'd had a good run at this.
Yeah, I mean, my guess was that they would have probably made the quarter and had an away tie if the season had, and then obviously you just have to see what happens. I mean, that's no different than now. I think potentially this has been Edinburgh's best ever season. You can argue that, and I think you're not going to be far off it. More points scored, more wins, etc., etc., etc. So there shouldn't really be any reason why they shouldn't then kick on from there. The only kind of snag in that really is that it's not a level playing field. Everybody else is thinking the same thing. Teams that have been struggling are going to want to change. Ospreys are going to be better. Dragons got rather dismantled by Bristol, but they're going to be a better side as the months go on because they're already starting to look that way. So the environment is going to be tougher, I think, is the bottom line. So if they can kick on, they'll deserve it. That's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, Premier Sports, being very, very Premier Sports this evening, have broken the embargo on the Pro 14 fixtures. I've announced the first weekend of fixtures, which is going to be on Friday the 2nd of October. So you have got Edinburgh versus Ospreys, Edinburgh at home, and Glasgow away to Connacht.
For the 4th time in 5 years?
Yeah. I read that.
Do you think they'll start? I mean, is the sin bin sofa COVID secure at Connacht? That's the big question.
Yeah.
Both Glasgow's game at 5 p.m. on the Saturday and Edinburgh's game at 7:40. Glasgow and Premier Sports 2 and Edinburgh Premier Sports 1. So time to renew those subscriptions if you haven't done so already. Yeah. I think times are tough at Premier Sports now. They've lost Sunset and Vine as their production partner. So you think essentially it's John from HR on camera one, and they've got somebody on the line with a pitch, somebody from accounts with a pitch side mic at the side.
Yeah, he also does cancellations and never answers the phone. So
there's no deals to be had with Premier Sports that I could see either at the minute.
No.
So
they were
yes.
they were actually doing a really interesting deal on. So they were marketing it based on the Serie A football, saying that they sold £49 for the year for the Serie A football, but that got you all the channels, so worth checking out.
Yep, let's have a look at that.
Look at the football deals because it will give you the rugby also.
I think there's also, I think you can also get some deals wherever you go. You get Edinburgh and Glasgow get a bit of kickback, but I don't.
I think
all the money goes into the kind of mattress under Mark Dodson's bed anyway, or
I think
the giant Scrooge McDuck money pit that he dives into at BT Murrayfield every morning. What were you going to say, Sandy? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Edinburgh announced that as part of your Castle Club membership, you would, I think if it was, the code was Edinburgh 80 or something like that.
Yeah, it's Edinburgh 80 in Glasgow.
But I think 2 days later, the Pro 14, Premier Sports announced that if you claimed Ospreys 80 or Leinster 80, everybody was getting it. So they thought they were getting an exclusive, only to discover that that wasn't quite the case.
They sent it to all the Glasgow fans with Cardiff 80 on it for a wee bit. So it's like, maybe not. Maybe just kickbacks for Cardiff. They're trying to get away from that Irish bias.
Yeah. The other kind of, there's got a couple of bits of news I'll pick on before we do Hands in the Rucks. We're over the hour mark already. Johnny Gray continues to Johnny Gray.
He does.
99. He has made 99 tackles in Europe this season and missed one. Literally like a Jay-Z song. 99 tackles and he's just missed one. I was mulling on Twitter today whether or not he needs a nickname. Now we used to have Stat Boy on here, which we quite liked. Someone said that they thought Opta Johnny was actually his name for a while until they realised that's just the name of the Opta account on Twitter.
I like that.
I like Opta Johnny. I thought I thought Thanos because there's that line in Endgame where he says I am inevitable, and I suppose the tackle from Johnny Gray is inevitable. But then Alan Dimmick pointed out that really nicknames need to be kind of some sort of pun or play on words. And the only thing I circled back to, and I don't think this is appropriate at all because I don't think it would work, but our discussion in our Patreon episode, John, where we talked about how comparable Johnny Gray's tackle success rate is to contraceptives. And Johnny Gray is more effective than a condom. So you could have Rubber Johnny.
Rubber Johnny.
But I don't want to start calling him Rubber or Rubber J.
Rubber J.
Rubber J.
Just call him RJ.
RJ. There we go. RJ.
RJ. Our own RJ. South Africa, RJ Snyman. We've got RJ Gray.
RJ Gray. There we go. RJ Gray. I like that.
It
sounds a bit like J.R. Hartley, the guy who's looking for the fly fishing book in the other. Like that. RJ Gray. We'll go with that. We got pinball to stick, I think, with the official channels in the end, So we will. I was going to say, in the official line phrase, we will penetrate with that soon. And I don't know. We'll get some market penetration with that. Not quite sure if that's quite extending the metaphor further that needs to be.
I think I'm going to steal your 99 tackles song for my metal album. So
that's good.
I'm going to use that one for add that to the list of bonkers tracks.
Yeah. Okay. The other bit of thing, Stuart Hogg's been doing the interview rounds. There'd be a couple of interesting things. He did one with the good, the bad, and the ugly, and James Haskell wasn't on it, so it was tolerable because Mike Tyndall's almost all right to listen to, and he's not doing the banter. There was a couple of bits of banter, but I don't know, it just seemed very forced. But the couple of interesting things I think were around Stuart Hogg's relationship with Gregor Townsend, and also the kind of, I think, I would call it a love triangle, but the triumvirate of Townsend, Hogg, and Russell, and how that relationship between the three of them works. And what was really interesting, John, and we did the Tooney autobiography.
Yes,
the very telling. So that's worth going back to. Listen to that podcast again, because we talked in that a lot about Cats in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon, and Gregor Townsend not wanting to players to repeat the sins of the father, so to speak.
Yes.
And essentially, that's what Stuart Hogg said. He was talking about that, when he'd nearly gone off to Ulster, and that Gregor Townsend had essentially like torn his head off about it, and really ripped into him about what you're playing at, what you're doing. And Stuart Hogg has said, Gregor Townsend does not want his players repeating the mistakes that he made as a player.
Yes.
And so that then is very telling. When you understand that in conjunction with what Gregor Townsend does in his autobiography, that he did fall out with Scottish head coaches. The relationship was irreparable. He does hold grudges again. Well, certainly at the time in his autobiography, he held grudges. So it's interesting, John, that this we were saying this, is this an explanation for the relationship with Finn Russell? And there it is in black and white.
Yeah, we've touched it. We've touched on it twice actually, because we mentioned during the 97 Lions chat as well. Where it was mentioned about the kind of the sins of the past, and looking at how uncomfortable Gregor Townsend looked at the time during the documentary, and it is. I think it's good. It's a good sign that you've got someone with a semblance of emotional intelligence who's able to accept, what, the past, maybe I done things, I made mistakes, and I don't want you. He's not sitting there like you see ex-pros sitting there going, well, I wouldn't change anything for the world because I've had this experience and that. He's telling people, don't do what I did. I could have had a better career. I could have done more. I could have done this. I could have done that. Yeah, it's worked out, but there's obviously a better way to do it. And I think that's really intelligent.
It is. I mean, even in the book, there's even that within the book. And again, it's well worth the read, because I think we said at the time, it's not something I think he would write now if he was to sit down and write it. And I think the key thing is when Geeks talks him into staying at Northampton rather than going to Cardiff. And he wanted to go to Cardiff because he wanted to play with Rob Howley, who he thought at the time was the best 9 in the world. So it's interesting, Sandy, that we get I think it speaks to Townsend as a coach. And I know we were critical at the time of the way that the SRU handled it, but maybe actually behind the scenes, not from a PR point of view, because I think that was pretty much a car crash, but from a coaching point of view, this has been handled incredibly well, because you've got Townsend and Russell and Hogg all saying Finn Russell's going to play for Scotland again. He's probably going to be in the next squad. And it's dealt with up front. It's done. There's going to be no questions about it, because it's all out there in the open. So, it's I wouldn't say a masterclass in coaching, because it probably shouldn't have happened in the first place, but certainly lessons seem to be learned all around.
Yeah, and ultimately that's where we want. And it may just be that the amount of water that's passed under the bridge has helped as well. It's allowed things to calm down. Whereas if we had, played more games, summer tours, that it would have been the pressure would have been there to include Finn, and maybe that would not have been. It would not have been welcome at that particular time. Whereas now, I think most people would say, "Well, that's done. Forget it. Let's move on." And he can come back into the fold without too much comment one way or the other, because we've just had that time that's elapsed. You're always going to have, I suppose, there's always going to be creative differences in the way that. I know I didn't hear the whole of the Hogg interview on that podcast, but he said himself he didn't always have the easiest relationship, and that's fine as long as you can find a way to work through it, so that when it comes to the game day or the match or the squad, that you can put that to one side and go on with it, because you don't like everybody you play with. You don't necessarily even have to like your coach, as long as you can. Yep. You respect them.
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually from Mosh Shen on YouTube, who's coming with this comment, and I wanted to pick up on this anyway. It says, do you think Finn Russell is the best 10 in the world? Both Hogg and Cotter have said so recently. I think the answer to that is yes. I don't have a doubt that he is the best in the Northern Hemisphere. I think the best in the Southern Hemisphere, I'm not sure. I think that might be stretching, but certainly he would be up there. The thing is, you've got, who's his competition? Johnny Sexton's getting on. I think he's the game. His recent performances for Leinster haven't been worldies. Oh, you got Owen Farrell, who's preferred at 12, and it doesn't do what Finn Russell does. I mean, he also does. Finn Russell doesn't do what Owen Farrell does tackle wise either. But let's.
I was going to answer this one with the a kind of follow up from last week with just a yes next question, but again, we have to try and put some sort of insight around this. I think you're absolutely right. I think he absolutely is the best 10 in the world, and I think you can always argue the piece about different types of 10, and it's the great thing about rugby is we have a variety of different players. But if you want a purely exciting attacking 10 who's going to get a backline firing, you take Finn Russell all day. Yes, you could argue Boden Barrett's quicker, Pollard's got a better boot, Farrell's maybe more of a thug, but Finn would be, in my type of team that I would want to see play, Finn would be your 10 all day, any day, without a doubt.
I think the fact he doesn't seem fazed by anything, and that was the other thing that was interesting this week. Alan Dimmock's done an article on Rugby World about what rugby's need for a superstar, and why hasn't rugby had one? I mean, there's Jonah Lomu. I think you could argue. I think was up there because he probably did that thing where he transcends the sport. You need someone that reaches outside of rugby. People outside of rugby know who he is, and there's probably been players that have touched on that in the past. I think maybe the Underwoods during the amateur days, you could probably argue kind of people, they're on Games Master, which is, Rory Underwood was on Games Master flying a plane at one point, and there's testament to how you've transcended the sport.
Will Carling for his extracurricular activities was obviously quite famous, wasn't he?
I don't think. Well, I'm not suggesting anyone goes and has an affair with royalty to try and become famous outside the sport. I think that's. Mike Tyndall tried, but I think
between that and his nose.
But I think it's interesting. I mean, the question would be what? I mean, there's no reason. I suppose it's. I don't think rugby as a sport lends itself to or would allow ego in the same way as football or even basketball, where you've had like Michael Jordan, and I don't think anybody could have that ego and drive at the same time and be allowed to have that and be celebrated for it. I mean, you look at Michael Jordan, is an incredibly driven guy, very confident in his own abilities, would talk himself up all day. I think in the culture of basketball and even the culture in America, that's okay. That's a good thing. If you had, let's take Finn Russell for an example. Finn Russell walking around like he's Billy Big Balls, talking himself up, talking up the team, talking about how great he is and playing the way he does, I don't think people would swallow that, John.
No, they absolutely wouldn't. It's bad enough that, there's plenty of people out there who say Finn Russell's arrogant and, the fact he's able to be resilient to making mistakes by laughing at it. People seem to think that this is some sort of cardinal sin and doesn't care about the game. So if he started talking about how good he is and stuff like that, he would be absolutely crucified. And I think Lomu was probably the only superstar we've had in rugby purely from there was a timing aspect and there was the physical aspect. The timing of just going to professionalism, the '95 World Cup, all the political sensitivity around that, coupled with this ridiculous specimen that no one had seen in rugby before. This ridiculous person. But I think there's an element as well with rugby is, we've talked about two other team sports, and yes, in basketball, there's more opportunity in perhaps say basketball or football for those I want to say kind of big plays. You can get individual scores in rugby, but there's always other stuff happening. There's always there's the ruck before you get the ball and skin everybody. You need three players to clear that ruck out. You need the person to pass to you in the right way. There's all those different things that have to happen. So it is still more of a team sport, and you don't have those opportunities for those amazing, YouTube-worthy plays necessarily. So I think we might struggle to see another superstar. I think the culture probably doesn't allow it, but it hasn't stopped Sexton from wanting to be it.
Sam, did you? I was going to say, did you away on this?
Yeah, I think the fact that even the way the question was phrased, is Finn Russell the best 10 in the world? Well, but you don't say, is Michael Jordan the best, whatever the position is in basketball, I don't know. But people
Jumper
just say,
man.
Michael Jordan is the best basketball player in the world, or was the best basketball. Whereas, Finn Russell may be the best 10, but he might not be the best rugby player.
Yeah.
He needs a scrum half. He needs props, and I suppose that, you've touched on it, that's the culture in rugby where you could say that a position is more important. I had that conversation in my own house not that long ago. My stepson was told he was going to be a hooker and wasn't particularly happy about it, and my wife was asking me, well, is that a good position or a bad position? I said, well,
it's a position.
There are no good and bad. There are ones that maybe you have different input in the game, but everybody contributes, so you shouldn't be unhappy about it.
You get to play as a fourth back row. We're a fourth back row at hooker now. It's fantastic. Just run around barring people.
But so you don't. It's not as simple as the best rugby player, because there is just so much.
It's funny as well, because we always talk about that. So in football, you always talk about it's always the attackers who get the pod. They're the best players in the world. And we do the same in rugby. Nobody's saying Xander Fagerson's the best rugby player in the world. Yeah. I think we should. Maybe we should start. Yeah.
It's probably a much longer conversation, because then you start to who's the best midfielder, who's the best defender, but that's further down the conversation, because off the tip of the tongue, best football in the world, people will go Messi or whatever it happens to be.
But he's what? He's like 2 foot nothing, and he'd be rubbish in central defence.
He could be a hooker.
Rubbish in goal. What Shem makes it, we're more likely to see the next global rugby in rugby sevens, and I think it probably lends itself more to the YouTube clips. And
yes,
but I think it's interesting. It's worth checking out the Patreon episode we did on rugby sevens with Lee from Blood and Mud and Professor Tony Collins, because we talked a little bit about why rugby sevens hasn't quite taken off. And I'm not going to go in there, because you're going to have to pay £3.95 to go and listen to it. But we had an interesting discussion around that point. Anyway, but it's got the most potential, I think, as part of the sport to take off and almost be a gateway sport, version of the sport to allow people to find 15s. But it's not there yet. We'll move on. We're nearly there. We're an hour and 20 minutes in.
Another hour to go or so.
We're slowly, so we're going to do this now. Yes, it's Hands in the Rockets or any other business section of the podcast. Joe Shepherd is gone, but he said he's going to watch us back. So I'm going to put the question to you both very quickly that Joe asked. He said, where do you feel Scottish rugby strengths are going forward at regional and test level, John?
Yeah, it's a big ask. I think certainly for both regional and test level, I think the main strength we're going to have going forward now is the greater alignment between the academies and the pro teams. It served other clubs, Leinster in particular, it served them very well and served Ireland very well, that format. And I think we've finally got it right. And we need to leverage that now. We need to make sure that the young talent that are being put in these academies, the contracts are there now. Glasgow and Edinburgh, the days of Glasgow and Edinburgh being able to go to market to fill their squads out are probably less than they were before. So reliance on the academy now, there's going to be more game time, there's going to be more opportunities, and it's why it's very frustrating for, I'm not going to say an impartial supporter, but a supporter who sees Edinburgh as kind of my second side, looking at Cockerell not giving guys like Chamberlain game time, not necessarily trusting Charlie Shield. It's very frustrating, and that for me, that has to change, because I think we've got a real strength there.
Yeah, and it's going to have to change because there isn't really an option now. We've kind of been put in that position now that there isn't an option to have 5 scrum halves and your youngest player's number 5, and at some point you'll either fall out the game or you'll be good enough to rise to the top. Sandy, what is it for you? What do you think the current strengths are?
To be honest, I don't think I can add to what John has just said. I wasn't 100% certain where Joe's question was coming from, and so I hadn't had time to think about it. But I can't add to what John's just.
No, that's fair. I think for me it's financial. I think if Mark, we touched on this earlier, that's the big strength for us going forward. If Mark Dodson has done, or the Scottish Rugby has done what Mark Dodson has said it's done, and it's retained Richard Cockerell, we retain Gregor Townsend, and let's face it, there's nobody else has got money to pay these guys to go elsewhere anyway. But if you can persuade them to stay for less money, which I assume in Cockerell's case he's done, and if you can manage the finances so that there is a game and there are clubs for people to get along to a weekend, and I'm not talking about Super 6, I'm talking about your community clubs, that community club survives, that we have, I'd be sorry to see Super 6 go, but if it had to go, that would be the first thing to go for me, because it's new, and let's circle back to it when we're better. But if Scottish Rugby comes out of this making only an 18 million loss, and the books are are much more balanced than other unions, then that's where our strength lies. Our strength lies in almost the kind of financial prudence that's been shown. If that proves to be the case, because the accounts have been delayed this year, we don't know that for certain. But if that's been the case, then that's going to be a big strength, because it puts us on a better footing going forward.
It's worth also noting as well that prior to, you've mentioned obviously Cockerell signing a new contract. Prior to the COVID situation, we had kind of started to build our new coaching team for the national team, and it's worth obviously touching on some of the assets we've got there. De Villiers in particular is a fantastic addition to that team. And if there's been one weakness in the Scottish game for many, many years, it's obviously been our forward pack hasn't necessarily been as dirty and snotty as we would maybe want it to be. So they were starting to show signs in the Six Nations that maybe was shifting. It's not that the guys aren't big enough, let's be honest. There's plenty of heft in there. So again, just from a purely playing perspective, having a wee bit of continuity from these coaches who are well thought of coaches, and we've secured them just before nobody can pay them now. So
and Steve even Steve Tandy was looking like a pretty shrewd signing after the first. He was well thought of. I think he'd done a lot of work.
Did you happen to catch? Now, it was interesting, the interview with Danny Wilson, which
I haven't got around to reading it yet, but it's on the offside line. Yeah,
it was very interesting. He was asked directly about the sort of rumours that there was a bit of an ultimatum given after, with regards to basically, we don't want you to be in the national setup anymore. You were going to sideline you over to Glasgow because you're under contract, but we don't want you here. And he addressed that very, very eloquently. He said, said all the right things regarding obviously a head coach's position. Any of the pro teams is a bigger job than the national than being an assistant coach at the national level, and that he categorically denied that there was any sort of ultimatum or any sort of putting people out to pasture. So
I think that stacks up, because we've got, and I don't want to play down John Dale, but that's what we've ended up with. It's not like he went and there was a ready-made successor to step into the role. It's not like there's someone said, well, we've got this other forward, this world-class forwards coach like Matt Proudfoot's lined up to come from the Springboks to Scotland, so we're going to sideline you. Then, so that it stacks up because they wouldn't have done that unless they had someone lined up to take his place. Yeah.
Yep.
John, I'm going to go to you first. What's your hands in the ruck this week?
So I was going to, a sort of wee continuation from the chat earlier on. Obviously, I think we all maybe have seen the chat around the Three Richies, the mountains, and people, Scottish rugby fans, doing what they do best and moaning about the Three Richies. In particular, there was a few comments, both on the official Scottish Rugby comment, the post about it, and other various locations. The forum. People, I posted just saying we need to have a bit of perspective. People moaning about I'm paying £34 and I might not get a ticket. I'm paying £34 for what? One person said, I'm paying £34 and I would pay more if I was guaranteed a ticket, but also I've unfortunately lost my job due to COVID. So, and my response to that would quite simply be, so rugby's an expensive day out, okay? If you've not been to a rugby game, it can be a very expensive day out. Can also be quite a cheap day out if you get the right people and they buy you lots of things, and if you're blessed to be like that, that's great. But it can be a very expensive day out if you're not able to absorb £34. And I don't know, obviously, lots of people's circumstances. Obviously, with the situation that's going on just now, £34 is £34. It's a lot of money for a lot of different things. Get you a nice Xbox game if you so desire. But if you can't absorb £34 for the opportunity to maybe, prior to knowing that we're probably not going to get to stadiums, and actually if you were sensible, you would have known that anyway, but if you're not able to absorb that £34, my suggestion would be that you probably can't afford to go to a rugby game anyway, and you just shouldn't moan about it, and maybe just shouldn't pay your £34. Nobody's holding a gun to your head to pay the £34. You have the option of the free Lomu account where you can get your shiny e-letter, newsletter, whatever they're wanting to call it.
And competitions, a chance to enter competitions. Let's not that is in there in that tier. Promise a chance to enter competitions.
There you go. What more do you need? No, seriously, it's like just a bit of perspective. Literally, and I don't want to go into obviously everything that's going on out there, but things are progressing again out there. Things are getting worse for people. People are literally losing family members. It really sticks in my craw when people are moaning about not getting a chance to go to Murrayfield.
It's like last week when we talked, it's like people moaning about having to pay $7.99 for Amazon Prime. Do you know what I mean? It's not, I think, I've said on the podcast before, I've got my doubts about things going behind paywalls and the impact that might have. But I was talking about that in the context of a £30 a month Sky Sports subscription. I think
minimum 18 months and
that kind of stuff. This is, what is it for a day pass? Is it like £10 for a day, £10-15 for a day pass? You multiply that. That's it's expensive. $7.99. That's how you pay. You can cancel anytime. It's 1 month. You can even get a 30-day free trial. I don't think there's anything to moan about because Amazon have come. I've no doubt that Amazon have put some big money into this. And I don't think the decision to go away from terrestrial TV would have been made lightly because of what the way that can be the viewing figures and the way you can then take that to sponsors. So yes, I agree with you, John. I don't think I can't fault that at all.
I know it sounds harsh. Like I know people are really passionate about rugby and stuff like that, and they really, they want to support the team and want to be there for the team. But we have to be realistic, and moaning about not being able to go to Murrayfield, just come on.
It's a bit. I agree with John, but it's a bit of frustration, I think, for people. It's been, and you're right, hard to get perspective, but folk are just fed up with everything the way it's going, and
Yeah.
and probably looking forward to getting back to Murrayfield, and now that's been pulled from under their feet. So whilst I agree that it's, you need to kind of bear it in mind that people are losing lives, people losing jobs, people, all the rest of it is I think it's just frustration.
Yeah, and I think that's you can lay the blame of that at a number of people's feet as to how messages have gone out. I mean, I'm probably naturally pessimistic, and I hadn't thought there'd be people at rugby grounds for until early next year anyway. But we have to appreciate that not everybody would have had that, and as you say, Sandy, people are pinning the hopes on it coming back, and it's something that keeps you going, and all of a sudden it's gone, and that's going to hit people hard. I think the interesting, while we're talking about the current situation, we haven't talked about, and I don't know, this might be Sandy's hands in the ruck, I don't know, but the Edinburgh Academy player who decided to...
No, I mean, it's not, but I think a 19, 20-year-old lad makes a mistake and goes to a party. Whilst he should get his arse kicked, of course he should. I think there are people suggesting just about to be hung, drawn, and quartered.
Yeah.
And it seems a bit sad to me that there was professional journalists on Twitter, all over Twitter, really giving it to whoever it is really, really badly, and not a single one of them seemed to have any concern for whether he was actually unwell or not.
Hard point.
You catch cancer. Nobody says to you, "What are you doing catching cancer?" But you catch COVID, and all of a sudden it's sort of victim blaming there. I mean, we're not daft. He shouldn't have been where he was clearly, and he should have known better. But
and he wasn't the only one. There were other academy players that went to the same party allegedly, and all of a sudden it's the player that's got COVID. It's his fault. The other lads, as far as we know, didn't catch it. So he's kissed the wrong girl in the night and he's caught it. I don't know if that's technically how you catch it. He should have had an He should have an RJ. Maybe he should have had.
I suppose that's better than nothing. Than some.
He should have had an RJ Gray on him, maybe. COVID cannot be sexually transmitted, to the best of my knowledge. We should have Alan McDonald on here for a fact check. But I agree with you, Sandy. I think that side of it bothered me. I think the other side of it that I thought was the argument about the fact that it was Jason Leach that was critical of him rather than Nicola Sturgeon, where she'd come out and talked about football. I thought that was, it was kind of it's a chip on the shoulder.
Oh, lost you.
We were told off by the First Minister, and it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything there other than he was the one. He was the one that was asked the question about it. Really.
Yeah, and there was a lot. I think there was a lot of people comparing the Aberdeen footballers and the Celtic guy who decided to fly to France. I think it was Spain's. And I don't know that the two things are. I mean, I'm not going to buy. I don't buy into the rugby's different than football, but I also don't buy into that you were getting from some of the football journalists that rugby was being treated differently. This is not the similar situation. This is a young lad rather than a seasoned professional. This is not a guy who's flown to Spain, for goodness sake. He's gone to a house party. They're not comparable.
And I mean, the other thing as well is we've got, we say he's gone to a house party. Let's put this in context. I mean, he's not going to be living in isolation in his own flat anyway. I mean, and this is the thing with young people, is that they're all living in house. Presumably, all these lads are living in house shares anyway. Yeah. So, he's got a house party. We don't know how many people with it. It conjures up an images of people sprawling out on the grass and being sick everywhere. But it literally could have been, he went to three lads went to three lads next door and
they play the PlayStation.
I know. We don't know the context. So I think you're quite right. What was your hands in the ruck, Sandy, before I move on to mine?
Well, I kind of wrote down a couple of things. I was annoyed with Stephen Jones. I
think that's a kind of. We should have that as a standard item.
Using the fact that Bristol beat the Dragons to say how rubbish the Pro 14 was, which I just thought was a bizarre comparison to make. I just, it was crazy. the other thing I'd written to myself was that there was an interview again. I get not blaming the thing with Palmer in the Sunday Times, but in an interview with Sam Thompson, there was at Edinburgh, which I thought, it's like, and I remember, in fact, when I was looking to check where his article, a similar article came up when he joined Edinburgh about how excited he was and how he'd sent his demo tape to Richard Cockrell when he'd heard there was a bit of interest, and he was all excited about it and desperate to come home, and because it didn't work out, all of a sudden the toys are right out the pram, and I just find that it's a bit OTT. He said in his interview that he reckoned he was better than some of the others that were playing. Well, of course you would say that, but my own opinion was that he was distinctly average, to be honest, and wasn't really never did anything in an Edinburgh shirt to merit him getting a second row jersey ahead of anybody else. And I think he's just not been good enough. That's why he's not there.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is the thought. Apart from that, the general the stuff coming up from former Edinburgh players speaks very highly of Richard Cockrell. I think that the Matt Smith stuff, I think that was just a hangover from his experiences at Glasgow when he was talking about what that he'd had exactly the same message from Cockrell. I mean, he hadn't had much of a chance to play under him, but you look at the Matt Scott interview and how he talked very, it was circumstance, and Richard Cockrell actually looked after him very well. I think what the flip side of that is the Dave Rennie, the march of the Dave Rennie, the queue of players to kind of hammer the nail at Dave Rennie's coffin is, Stuart Hogg genuinely surprised that he would speak out like that and say, I didn't know how I was playing under Dave Rennie, because to have a high profile player. And you can you can maybe write off the Adam Ashes, the Matt Smiths, the other guys who've played under Dave Rennie and gone and write off, all right, what sour grapes, and they want to get in games, and that's why they're unhappy. But you throw someone like Stuart Hogg in saying, I didn't know what I was doing week to week, and all of a sudden that kind of it is the kind of the cherry on top, I suppose. It's the proof in the pudding that there's some things were not right at Glasgow.
As you rightly say, you can probably write off squad players who maybe aren't good enough. Guys like Rory Hughes, maybe just not good enough. Not through opportunity and through injury and situation, just haven't quite made it. And obviously, some people react in different ways to that. Rosa and the Buckfast it was a unique way of reacting to it. We've got to give him kudos for that. But player leaves club and is annoyed about it. There's a shocker, eh? And there's an interview with Mr. Thompson actually mid-season where he's talking about he's getting a run of games and he's delighted and thrilled, at being there and stuff like that. So it's all kind of by the by. But when you've got let's say a premium asset like a Stuart Hogg, or we talked about the love triangle of Townsend, Hogg, and Russell. Well, two of that three were not Rennie fans, in both Russell and Hogg. So, there's more stories coming out, and I think it's back to that thing of if you were a Rennie man, he had a very particular way of managing the players, and if you flourished under that, then you were fine. If you didn't, you really didn't.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I think the Thistle lads put a meme out, kind of saying, anytime there's a player leaves Glasgow or Edinburgh, they all saw the journalists straight circling. You've got Mark Palmer and Jamie Lyles circling, ready to get the exclusive. And I can't blame that. I think I will say I'm not criticising Jamie or Mark at all. I think they do fantastic work, but it's just interesting. It's like getting a Glasgow or an Edinburgh ex-player to talk out in bad terms is like shooting fish in a barrel these days, which I think is. I think with Dave Rennie, it sounds like with good reason. With Richard Cockrell, I agree with you, Sandy. I think it's hard to. I don't think we can pin that on Richard Cockrell. No.
I guess I just so I did have to laugh when I was looking at this. I noticed that Rory Hughes had said that that rugby is just a business, and I thought, well, you're getting paid for it. Of course, it was a business. It's like, surely that hasn't come as a surprise to you. You know, you've got wages.
He I think he always bought into that he was more than that because of the lovely marketable story of the Castle Milk boy who made it to the Glasgow first team and stuff. You know, it's all just tripe, really.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're an asset to a club, and yes, you get used and abused, and you get paid handsomely for it.
Yeah.
All right.
It
Speaking
shouldn't
of-
come as a surprise.
Speaking of which, my hands in the ruck is people who use their injuries, the effect the game has had on them to promote books. I think we've talked about. I mean, certainly the James Haskell and the Dylan Hartley stuff. Sandy, we've touched upon that. You know, all. You know, it's stuff. You know, they're talking about war injuries and all the fact they've been left crippled by rugby, and it's an absolutely a valid point to make. And if they were making it in the context of I'm speaking out on behalf of people who can't speak out, then I'm all for it. But they're speaking out because James Haskell and Dylan Hartley, surprise, surprise, both have books out, and the Christmas book market's coming soon. And then this week we had, you know, this Joe Marler, my old friend, I'm off of Twitter. Joe's not a big fan of mine. Who, you know, I talked very eloquently about his struggles with mental health. And I will say, I think one of the things that the article did well, and I think Joe Marler did very well, was talking about how the practical steps he'd taken to get help and what he had personally found helpful in managing it, and how the insight he had into his behavior. I will say, I don't think his insight wasn't as full as it could be. I don't really think he'd accepted what he did to Alan Wynne-Jones was wrong, or to the extent to which it was wrong. He just kind of said, well, I apologize and we move on. And you know, I shouldn't have made a big thing out of it. And I'm not sure he fully grasped the magnitude of what that, you know, grabbing another man's genitals, what that would say, or the magnitude of what he did. And similarly, I think with the Gypsy Gate thing, again, he was kind of how he was apologetic about it, but I'm not entirely sure he came across as contrite as he might do in that interview. And the other thing I think that kind of, I think it's great that he's talking out about it, but at the same time, he's got a book to promote, and that bothers me. The cynical side of me says, well, yeah, he has talked about his mental health in the past, but would he talk about it as openly if he didn't have a book out on the 1st of October? You know, you've got guys like John Hardy, you've got guys like Fraser Brown, you've got guys like, even like Chris Robshaw, who are ready, willing, and prepared to talk openly about their own struggles with mental health, and ready and willing to talk about what they have done, how it's affected them, how other people can seek help without having something to promote. And that, so I suppose that bothered me a little bit.
That's understandable. I think I could completely agree.
The other thing, I did one more hands in the ruck was, and we've not mentioned the Exeter Chiefs thing for a while, but Leeds Rhinos today released a rugby shirt to raise money for actual rhinos. So Leeds Rhinos have now done more for rhinos than Exeter Chiefs have done for Indigenous people, despite claiming that the Indigenous, you know, they're using an Indigenous chief symbol on their shirt is there to support Indigenous peoples, despite never financially having paid money over to them or any support of any kind. So Leeds Rhinos have actually done more to help the welfare of rhinos than Exeter Chiefs have done to help any Chiefs. So there you go.
That's a magnificent thing to end on, isn't it?
I know. One last question. This is I'm going to give John levels of insight into this. Ryan Cobain says, would a more Irish-based approach work in Scotland? The focus from grassroots through to club team and then onto international? Yes, is the answer to that, Ryan. We've discussed that. I think me and John and Ian discussed that in a Patreon episode last month. So yes, an Irish-based approach would work, because it would mean more Berwick youth players in the under-16 team when it comes around, rather than school being heavy on schools. And
in an ideal world, it would mean that both Glasgow and Edinburgh were then allowed to offer charitable tax breaks to South African World Cup winners to come over and play for our team.
Yep. Those were all, I should make clear, those were all tongue-in-cheek comments after last week when I was accused of being divisive for saying that people didn't like Finn Russell because he wasn't from a private school. 80% of that was a joke, 20% of me was me being serious.
I was probably closer to 50-50, to be fair.
And on that note, as we pass the hour and 3/4 mark,
woo, stamina!
on a podcast to which I thought, we've not got much to cover tonight, lads. But there we go.
Better than that, buddy. You should know better.
We've done Sandy a favour there. We talked more about everything else than we did about the Bordeaux game. So
it's been cathartic, though. It's all right.
I was surprised there wasn't a glass of Bordeaux to celebrate, Sandy. I thought...
Too much of that at the weekend.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us. You can watch these podcasts live. We'll be back next week. Tuesday night's our normal night. It's either Tuesday or Wednesday at 8:30 live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. Please subscribe. There's a link you can find on any of those. It'll take you to the various ways to subscribe. You can download us afterwards as well. Sign up to the Patreon to get ad-free versions of the audio podcast, as well as exclusive content. We've got our search for Scottish Rugby's hardest ever player coming in all through October on Patreon and on the podcast. That's going to be a lot of fun. So we hopefully kicking that off in the next week or so. But for the moment, it is goodbye from me and goodbye from John and Sandy.
Night, folks.
Hey, all.